The evening sky had turned the color of bruised steel, and the first rumble of distant thunder crawled across the horizon as old Victor made his slow walk down the muddy village road. His umbrella, nearly as old as he was, rattled in the wind with every gust, its bent spokes threatening to snap. The rain had begun as a drizzle, but now it poured with a cold, unkind heaviness that soaked through even the thickest coat. Still, Victor walked on, leaning slightly on his wooden cane, humming a half-forgotten tune to distract himself from the chill settling deep into his bones. As he approached the old half-collapsed shed near the wheat fields, a strange sound cut through the drumming rain. A thin, trembling squeak almost swallowed by the storm, but not quite. Victor stopped mid-step. For a moment he thought he imagined it. At his age, his ears weren't what they used to be. But then it came again, a small, desperate cry. He frowned and angled his ear toward the sound. Another whimper, and another, one softer, frightened, overlapping. Not one voice, but several. The old man felt a pull in his chest. Without thinking, he stepped off the path, his boots sinking slightly into the wet earth as he approached the shed. Rain cascaded off the umbrella as he pushed the rotting wooden door aside. The hinges groaned loudly, as though protesting being disturbed after so many years. Inside was dim, shadows flickering each time lightning flashed behind him. Victor squinted, scanning the floor. At first he saw nothing but broken boards, old tools, and piles of discarded junk. But then he heard the sound again, right under the torn workbench. He knelt down, feeling his knees protest, and reached beneath the bench. His fingers brushed against soggy cardboard. He pulled it forward into the light. His breath caught in his throat. Inside the box was a tiny, shivering mess of life, a newborn puppy and 3 kittens, huddled together as if trying to escape the cold, rain that still dripped through. Holes in the roof. Their fur was soaked, their eyes barely open, their bodies trembling violently. Someone had left them here, left them to die. Victor's heart cracked wide open. He swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in his eyes. Gently, with a tenderness that came from a lifetime of caring, he lifted the fragile box into his arms. "Don't worry," he whispered to the tiny creatures. "You're not alone anymore." Victor pushed the door of his cottage open with his shoulder, careful not to jostle the flimsy cardboard box clutched in his arms. The warm scent of burning firewood drifted faintly from the stove, though its glow had nearly faded to red embers. The cottage was humble, only 2 small rooms, wooden floors, and walls lined with old photographs but it was clean, quiet, and lonely. Too lonely. He hurried inside, shutting out the rain with a shaky breath. Water dripped from his coat and umbrella onto the floor, but he didn't care. His eyes remained fixed on the trembling bundle of fur inside the box. He placed the box gently beside the stove and knelt down. "Easy, you're safe now," he whispered. Though the tiny creatures were too young to understand the words, they responded with faint, exhausted squeaks, each sound slicing softly through Victor's heart. With practiced hands, he fed more wood into the stove and opened the air vent. Flames flickered alive, spreading warmth through the cottage. The rain outside continued its relentless drumming, but inside the world felt still. Victor reached for an old wool blanket folded neatly on the rocking chair, the one his wife had knitted years ago. It smelled faintly of lavender, the same scent she used to love. As he draped the blanket into the box, something inside him shifted. A memory stirred. Evenings when he and his wife sat by this same stove, talking softly while a cat slept in her lap. The memory pressed gently against his chest, both tender and painful. He wrapped the tiny animals in the warm wool, arranging them close together. The puppy whimpered weakly, nudging its nose against Victor's palm. One of the kittens tried to climb the blanket but only managed to raise its head for a second before collapsing in exhaustion. Victor smiled sadly. "You poor little souls," he murmured. "Who could leave you like this?" He fetched a small towel, drying the trembling bodies one by one. Then he warmed some milk on the stove, pouring it into a shallow dish. Using a syringe, he fed them drop by drop, careful and patient. The creatures were fragile, far too fragile, but they were fighting. And so would he. As he worked, the cottage slowly transformed. The silence that had hung over the home for years began to shift, replaced by tiny breaths, soft mews, and faint puppy whimpers. For the first time since his wife's passing, Victor felt the warmth returning, not just in the room but in his heart. The days that followed were a slow, exhausting battle, one that Victor threw himself into with everything he had. The tiny animals were dangerously weak. Every breath they took seemed like a small victory, every silence a frightening pause. Victor knew the odds were against them. Newborns left in the cold rarely survived, but he also knew he couldn't let them fight alone. His routine changed overnight. He set alarms, something he hadn't done in years, waking every 2 hours to check on the little ones. The cottage that once held only stillness now echoed with tiny cries at odd hours. Victor moved through the dark with practiced care, feeding each baby with a syringe, rubbing their bellies to help them swallow, keeping them close to the stove to preserve their fragile warmth. The puppy was the loudest, squirming with stubborn spirit. One of the kittens was so small that Victor feared touching it would break something delicate inside. Another kitten had an injured paw. The third one, the tiniest, hardly made a sound at all. That worried him the most. Some days, when the rain stopped and the sun finally peeked through the clouds, Victor carried the box onto the porch. He sat rocking slowly in his chair, letting the morning light touch their fur. "Sunlight is good for the soul," he whispered, as if speaking to his wife somewhere beyond the sky. And maybe for little hearts, too. Neighbors occasionally passed by on the road. Some paused to watch him carefully tending to the fragile animals. A few shook their heads. "Why waste your strength, Victor?" One man called from the gate. "They may not even make it." Victor simply smiled, a small, gentle smile that held decades of quiet resilience. "They need me," he replied softly. But deep in his weary heart, he knew the truth was bigger than that. He needed them too. The animals gave him purpose, a reason to wake before dawn, a reason to move, to hope, to fight against the heaviness that had settled in his life after his wife's death. Their survival became his mission, but also his healing. Every squeak, every tiny paw stretch, every moment a kitten nuzzled into his palm felt like a promise that life still had something to offer. And so he kept going, feeding, warming, comforting, fighting for them, and slowly, without realizing it, fighting for himself. Weeks slipped quietly into a new routine. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, life began to bloom in Victor's cottage once more. The tiny creatures he had rescued from the rain were no longer trembling shadows of life. They were growing, changing, discovering the world with stumbling steps and curious noses. Every sunrise brought a little miracle. The puppy was the first to show real strength. Its legs, once too weak to hold its weight, now wobbled determinedly as it followed Victor around the house. If Victor went to the kitchen, the puppy limped after him. If he stepped outside to gather wood, the puppy scratched at the door until he returned. It had become his constant shadow, clumsy, loyal, and full of unshakable spirit. The kittens blossomed as well, each with their own tiny personality. The largest one, a gray fluffball, learned to climb Victor's trousers whenever he sat down, using his leg like a tree. The smallest kitten, once quiet and frail, surprised Victor by becoming the loudest, mowing insistently whenever she wanted attention or milk. The one with the injured paw healed slowly, favoring the limb, but refusing to be left behind by her siblings. Their energy filled the cottage like sunlight. Little paws pattered across the floor. Soft mews bounced off the walls. The puppy yipped excitedly whenever Victor entered the room as if greeting a hero. "And Victor?" He laughed. Not a polite chuckle or memory-born sigh, but a real, full laugh, the kind that warmed the air around him. It had been years since such a sound had escaped him. Even he was startled by it the first time, pausing as though he had awakened something long asleep inside him. Every corner of the house began to change. The rocking chair now hosted a sleeping kitten most afternoons. The kitchen floor, once spotless, was scattered with food crumbs and little muddy paw prints. The old dining table had become a playground for curious kittens, who knocked over spoons and chased shadows with fierce determination. One peaceful morning, Victor carried a cup of tea onto the porch. The sunrise painted the sky in soft pinks and golds. The animals followed him, the puppy curling at his feet, the kittens piling into his lap. The warmth of their tiny bodies seeped into him like medicine for a tired soul. Victor looked out at the quiet road, stroked the smallest kitten gently, and whispered, "I'm not alone anymore." And for the first time since his wife's passing, the words felt true. Months passed, and the 4 tiny lives that Victor had rescued from a soggy cardboard box had grown into vibrant, mischievous companions. Their transformation did not go unnoticed by the village. What truly stunned people, however, was the transformation of Victor himself. The old man who once walked with a slow, heavy step, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the ground, now moved through the village with a newfound lightness. There was a spark in his eyes, a steady warmth in his smile, and wherever he went, his little family followed. The puppy, now a sturdy young dog with bright eyes and a wagging tail, trotted proudly at Victor's side like a loyal guardian. The kittens, each bigger and braver now, had claimed Victor's coat pockets as their personal carriage. Their tiny heads popped out as he walked, whiskers twitching, eyes wide with curiosity at every passing bird, leaf, or child. Children in the village adored them. "Uncle Victor! Uncle Victor, can we pet them?" they cried, running up to him with eager hands. He would chuckle, kneel down slowly, and let the little ones stroke the kittens, soft fur, or scratch the dog behind the ears. The dog accepted the attention with gentle patience, while the kittens blinked lazily, as though believing they were royalty receiving their daily tribute. Neighbors greeted Victor warmly now. People who used to simply nod in passing stopped to chat. Even those who once doubted him found themselves drawn in by the quiet beauty of what he had done. One crisp autumn afternoon, Victor sat on a bench in the village square while the dog chased falling leaves, and the kittens tumbled together under his coat like playful snowballs. A few villagers gathered around him, watching the scene with soft smiles. "Hard to believe they were once so small," said one woman, wiping the corner of her eye. "They wouldn't be here without you." Victor shook his head gently. "No," he said, voice low but warm. "They saved me just as much." The villagers fell silent. They all knew what he meant. Everyone remembered the lonely widower who kept to himself, whose house felt like a shadow of a life once full. Seeing him now, laughing with children, sharing stories again, living, it stirred something deep in every heart. Some brushed away tears. Others simply stood quietly, moved by a truth they hadn't realized until that moment. The old man had saved 4 little lives. But in doing so, he had found his own life again,